Hello and welcome to the One Take Show. My name is Kausub Srivastav and today we are in conversation with a wonderful guest. Yes, our very own Dr. Kumar Askan Pandey. Sir is an associate professor here at Dr. Ramanaloya National Law University. He's also one of the founding faculty members for our university. He's an expert at subjects like criminology, criminal law, victimology, and many other such spheres. In this episode, Sir has taken time off his really busy schedule to talk about the condition of criminal justice system here in India, especially with reference to the changes that are now brought because of COVID-19 and the pandemic and how it is impacting the various aspects of criminal justice system. We will talk about various spheres and we'll discuss some really enlightening topics. So please stay tuned till the end of this video because it is going to add a lot of value and give you a lot of perspective about this issue. If you like this episode, make sure you like, share, and subscribe so that I can make more and more such videos. If you have any suggestions, feedbacks, please do reach out to me. I would absolutely love that. Hence, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's jump right into the conversation. Hello, sir. Welcome to the One Take Show. I am so happy and so glad to have this opportunity to talk to you over this medium. Obviously, I've had the opportunity to attend your lectures and to sit in your classroom and direct and interact with you directly and learn from you over such a period of time. And I've really cherished every moment of it. But today, I am so happy because the One Take Show is a platform that has given me this opportunity to talk about very relevant topics. So thank you so much for taking time out and thank you so much for gracing my podcast.
Thanks to you, Kaustubh, and it's really a privilege being with you here on this platform because right from the days when you told me, rather, you uploaded a few of the audios, also videos now on different platforms, including Spotify, of course. I've been very keenly following each and every, I think, conversation that you have had. Right. And I'm really impressed and feeling privileged that you found me worthy of being part of this series of conversations. Thank you very much. And thank you also for very kind words.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I think that's too much appreciation, but I really feel privileged for that.
I mean it. I mean it. I'm not being very formal, of course. Yeah,
right.
I mean it.
Thank you so much.
And I think this idea that you are carrying forward is something very innovative. I really appreciate this, and you chose a different medium altogether and a different mode and method altogether. Is something that I feel very, I think, proud about. Usually what happens that people record videos and then they upload it on YouTube. YouTube is the most popular. You are also doing that, but the way you are doing it is something that I think is very appreciable, very appreciable.
Thank you so much, sir. I think this is the kind of appreciation that keeps us going during especially times like lockdown. And first of all, to begin with the conversation today and to lay out a plan, I think a very relevant topic is at our hands today, and everyone needs to understand this because COVID-19 as a pandemic has impacted one of the largest sections of our of our society today, that is criminal justice system.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And I would love to know your opinion before we get into the details or specific points that we want to discuss. A little bit an overview as to what, in your opinion, has been an impact of this pandemic on criminal justice system overall.
A critical evaluation of impact of pandemic on the criminal justice system would require some more time. But I have a few very quick observations. I don't know if it would be correct to call that evaluation, but still, I would share what I feel, and you may call it evaluation. Now, see, something which was noticed everyone noticed was the role of police that completely changed. The entire police system,
Right, sir.
not only in the metros, not only in the big cities, but also in the rural areas,
Ji.
the entire apparatus that was mobilized only to ensure that people do not violate the lockdown norms. Now, that was something unprecedented. It's not that prohibitions and prohibitory orders have not been imposed
Right.
before the pandemic set in. But even in those areas where prohibitory orders would be enforced, such mobilization of police, which would be spending all their time in checking that whether people are sort of wearing masks or they are keeping social distancing,
Right, sir.
whether they are out for some legitimate purpose or they are just roaming around this and that. That was something very different for all of us
Right, sir.
to see. The second thing, I'll come to how that has impacted the criminal justice system.
Right.
The second thing was that courts were almost shut. When I say that courts were almost shut, of course, I include courts right from the grassroots level. Supreme Court has issued quite a few directions, of course,
Right, sir.
different orders, even taking suo motu cognizance of certain representations and newspaper reports and all. High courts were also functioning. But the real criminal justice administration is in the trial courts. And the trial courts were almost shut. I often find certain Facebook posts and other social media posts. My friends, even the students who are in the judicial services, only now telling that how they are back to work. And so we are just opening up. The criminal justice system in the real sense is only now opening up.
Right.
It was completely shut
Right.
during
The lockdown.
what we call, the period of lockdown.
Right.
The only courts that were functioning at the district level were the courts of the remand magistrates,
Right.
where someone who would be arrested in connection with some crime would be brought before the magistrate, because that's a mandatory requirement. That's a statutory constitutional requirement that any further detention has to be authorized by the magistrate beyond 24 hours. Because police were not doing their regular job, investigation, etc., etc., that also impacted filing of charge sheets.
Right.
Police would file charge sheets only after the investigation is complete, or at least they have sufficient evidence to press for a certain charge. Charge sheets during this period were not filed in the court. That led to another very important, implication.
Right.
Implication was that there is a provision of default bail,
Ji.
section 167 of CRPC, which says that if investigation is not complete in 60 days or 90 days, as the case may be, charge sheet is not filed, the accused is entitled to default bail.
Right.
Now this non-filing of charge sheet, it became such a big issue in several states, including the state of Uttar Pradesh, that I'll tell you that the prosecution department and the state government, they had even wrote a letter to which I had fortunately access to, requesting the High Court to issue certain directions for the magistrates as far as this default bail is concerned. But there is another aspect. What would happen if the charge sheet is not filed in 60 or 90 days?
Right.
The person would be out of judicial custody.
Judicial custody.
Judicial custody means that he is in jail as an under trial, awaiting filing of charge sheet and further action on the part of the police, this and that. And this is exactly what the Supreme Court also ordered. Now see the connection. In one of the first orders that the Supreme Court had passed post lockdown was concerning the condition of prisons which are overpopulated.
Right. Right.
You refer to the reports of the BPRND, the Crime in India report. Every report would tell the same story.
Right.
That all the prisons are overpopulated.
Right.
When prisons are overpopulated, of course, and prisons are living hells. This is something that I am quoting from authoritative source.
Yes.
In 2016, the Supreme Court had again taken a suo motu cognizance of the inhuman conditions, and this is exactly how the case is known. Inhuman conditions in 1382 prisons in India is the title of the case. So that inhuman condition is on account of this overpopulation in the prisons. And why there is an overpopulation? Because 70% of the prison population in India is of under trials. 70% of the prison population is of under trials. There seems to be little political will of releasing people on bail on some pretext or other. Though there are statutory provisions in CRPC which allow the state government to exercise their power of releasing even under trials on bail. So I relate the two. The conundrum that has been created. On one hand, the Supreme Court says that release prisoners after considering their case, of course. It's not a blanket order that you would be releasing all the prisoners, of course, because the situation was not that bad in the Indian prisons, thankfully.
Right.
But still, the order facilitated. On the other hand, the state government is trying to impress upon the high courts that this default bail benefit should not be extended to those who are already there. So this is one quick observation that I make.
Right.
And another is that hundreds and thousands of cases were registered against people across the country under provisions which were not known even to the lawyers. You won't believe that most of the Indian universities, including the NLUs, including in our university, we don't teach Section 188 of IPC. We don't even teach Section 269, Section 270, Section 271,
Right, sir.
Section 290. These are not part.
Mm-hmm.
These are not part of even competitive examinations.
Right, sir.
That people who might have missed it in the law school would be studying it in the coaching classes or studying it on their own. So another impact is that we are going to study new laws from the next academic session.
Right, sir.
And how these laws in fact work in the society. And that is certainly going to contribute to the lack of jurisprudence as far as these provisions are concerned, where I must say that there is very little academic commentary and also very little judicial opinion, so that we can understand that how these provisions have to be implemented and how these laws have to be understood. So that is again one quick observation. The other one is that those certain traditional crimes got decreased. Lockdown had, if I may use that term, positive impact. Traditional crimes, certain traditional crimes. And also certain unfortunate incidents like the road accidents were hardly people on road and all. Road accidents also got decreased. Thefts were at the bare minimum. Murders, other traditional crimes. But then the new age crimes like cyber crimes, of course. Cyber criminals have very quickly adapted to the new situation. The traditional criminals are still trying their best to cope with the pandemic and all. But the cyber criminals, they have adapted so quickly that that has taken everyone by surprise, and the entire police system has been caught unawares. I'll give you one example, just one example. After the advertisements were issued calling upon everyone to contribute to the PM CARES Fund, several fake websites, they lured people to contribute. And thousands of, you won't believe, within a week before the state could act or this could be detected, thousands of people were cheated, not only in India, but even from abroad. So by some estimates, cyber crimes increased by around 80%. Of what would be the average number of cyber crimes pre-COVID-19 era. In the past 3 months, of course, that has gone up by almost 80%. So these are a few quick observations as far as impact of COVID-19 on criminal justice administration is concerned. If you want me to tell you something very specific, I'll try.
Right, sir. Thank you so much. Because I would like to specifically ask you for clarifications on the certain points that you've mentioned in this exhaustive introduction regarding the entire impact of COVID-19. first one is the virtual courts, and as you mentioned that courts right from the apex court to the lower courts, even in cities like Lucknow, have not been functioning, and that has had impact which has invited criticism as well as appreciation. So I would like to know your opinion on exactly what do you understand from these virtual courts, and how is it impacting the criminal justice system?
Virtual courts are here to stay, no doubt about it. And but what is important to see is that whether we have the infrastructure
Right.
in place. The Supreme Courts, the High Courts, the Supreme Court, not Supreme Courts, of course, may have that infrastructure in place. There's a virtual court project going on for the past so many years. In 2005, enabling amendments were also made in CRPC. For example, Section 161 of CRPC, Section 164 of CRPC, even Section 167 of CRPC, that is related to the default bail and all. It acknowledges, enables, and allows use of audio-visual technology. But except in those cases, let me tell you, where it is dangerous to move the prisoner from the court to from the court to the prison, or from the prison to the court. The courts have adopted audio-visual means for recording the statements and for conducting certain proceedings. So that led to this complete breakdown of criminal justice administration during the pandemic at the grassroots level. All the remand magistrates would be requiring the accused to be produced before them in person. And I know of no case where technology was used for deciding remand or otherwise. Law allows that. But yes, using technology, several courts are functioning, and functioning like the real courts, of course, passing all sort of orders, leaving impact, of course. But this digital divide that we all knew that is a real thing has shown its most ugly face during the period of pandemic and in the functioning of courts. And then certainly there is a section of lawyers who are not very comfortable. There may also be judges, we may not know, who are not very comfortable. And also the platform that they are using, how comfortable, how convenient, how foolproof that platform is also one issue. What worries me when we are talking about this virtual court is that we could not create a centralized system where the Supreme Court would be taking lead that, see, this is the platform, customized, made for the Indian courts, where they can very easily conduct their proceedings online and rope in all the courts. Certain platforms I won't be naming, which we are using for informal conversations and webinars and this and that, are also being used by the courts. They have their own, I think, technological and other issues. So, in spite of all the enabling provisions in CRPC, in spite of all the enabling decisions that the Supreme Court had delivered or the high courts had delivered, appreciating and highlighting that how useful the audio-visual technique would be in dispensation of justice. We unfortunately could not create the infrastructure required for that, and I completely agree with that observation that virtual courts can't replace, they can only supplement.
Right, right, sir.
And once things are normal, I think no one is going to conduct proceedings online. I don't think. Even the, I think, most sophisticated platform would not be preferred by those who would be having all the technological know-how to conduct proceedings. And virtual courts are complete, I think, no in the trial proceedings.
Right,
the reasons, legal reasons.
right.
It's not possible.
Right, sir. That is a very understandable conclusion, because obviously there are a lot of we observe that there are a lot of limitations that are coming up. As you mentioned, there is no uniform system, so there are different platforms for different courts, different methods of filing. Although certain courts like Delhi High Court or let's say Supreme Court of India might have somehow created their own filing system, which themselves have a lot of glitches. And yes, I believe that is one of the issues. Which also brings you talk about how
it's not only Kaustubh, it's not only about e-filing. E-filing is just a part.
Right.
The real problem would be that when the judge and the lawyer are face to face in the virtual world, of course.
Right, sir.
E-filing system is I think one of the most remarkable achievement as far as the e-courts project is concerned. And that has, I think, what we call, that has created level playing field for everyone. Everyone.
Right, sir.
But the real issue is that whether the courts can function in the cyberspace, in the online environment.
Right.
Like the real courts. But at the same time, what needs to be appreciated is that it's easy to criticize, of course. There will always be certain issues with the online system. But the Supreme Court rose to the occasion. The High Courts also rose to the occasion. They have passed fantastic orders using whatever platforms, of course, they found convenient and comfortable. And as they say that something is better than nothing. So we were saved from virtual blackout as far as justice dispensation system is concerned, only thanks to the virtual courts. Yeah.
Right, sir. I completely agree with you. I think this is a revolutionizing step that has been taken up. But you also very specifically mentioned the condition of prisons, and you talk about how prisoners, the overpopulation and problems like that. My specific question to you will actually be about two different situations of prisons. Obviously, the normal prisons where we see that the situations are affected because of the COVID-19. So maybe we can talk about a little bit about that. And yes, so maybe your opinion on the condition of prisons and the prisoners at the times of pandemic and how they have been impacted.
Now this is something that I don't know what to say, because the Supreme Court itself, or the different high courts, they seem to have created a massive jurisprudence as far as prison administration is concerned.
Right.
In the past 30-40 years. Justice Krishna Iyer's judgments, landmark judgments are there. As far as prison administration is concerned, as far as the conditions in prisons are concerned, as far as the duty of the state is concerned towards the prisoners, Justice Gajendra Gadkar's judgment, Justice Pathak's judgments. But the situation and the condition of Indian prisons has not improved even a bit. I dare say this.
Right.
And I have this courage of saying this only because 4 or 5 years back, the Supreme Court was constrained to take a suo motu cognizance of inhuman conditions across the Indian prisons.
Right.
Tihad is a showpiece.
Right, sir.
Visiting Tihad may lead you to believe that things are so rosy as far as Indian prison administration is concerned, or the conditions in the prisons are concerned. But prisons other than Tihad, prisons other than those which are in bigger cities, metros, which are under the constant glare of the media and all, are in such pathetic condition. And the reason is lack of political will. First, prisoners are condemned people. There is still this understanding, not only in the masses but also in the administration, that they don't deserve any fundamental rights or human rights, in spite of, as I said, that beautiful jurisprudence that has been created over 30-40 years.
Right, sir.
And they are overpopulated. 70% are under trials. The statutory provisions have not been invoked. I'm only repeating myself, I guess.
Right, sir.
But still, the most vulnerable during the period of pandemic would be the ones whose liberty has been curtailed. We all felt very vulnerable.
Right, sir.
Why? Because our liberty was curtailed.
Right.
And see to what extent their liberties were curtailed or are curtailed.
Right.
The healthcare system in the prison, the mental health care system in the prison, these are all, I think, non-existing. So if the pandemic sets in, it would be, I think, having a catastrophic effect on the prison population. So Supreme Court's direction, asking the states to consider releasing prisoners who deserve, of course, and who have a place to go. There are many prisoners who have no place to go. There are many prisoners whose families would not be very comfortable receiving them, especially in these difficult, trying times, of course. So I think hundreds and thousands of prisoners were released, and that was very, I think, heartening and welcome development that took place thanks to the intervention of the Supreme Court in this.
Right, sir.
Those who were released on parole, the period of parole has been extended. Those who were released on bail, certainly their interim bail period would be extended. And I personally believe that it's high time that we decongest our prisons and make these prisons more humane.
Right, sir.
Yeah.
Right, so because that is a very important one of the factors that has now surfaced because of the pandemic. The criminal justice system has a lot of reliance on the prisoners and the life in prisons and how the conditions are in prisons, and I think this pandemic has impacted that sector. But you mentioned how there are multiple facets to it, and this brings me to a rather interesting question as we before we move on to talking about the Epidemic Diseases Act and their applications. We also mentioned the children who are in conflict with law and their situation during pandemic. We've seen recently the developments which have highlighted this issue of juvenile justice once again, especially in the digital sphere. And now we talk about children who are in conflict with law. What do you think is the impact of COVID-19, or is there any specific opinion that you might have? Quickly, if you can address this.
I guess I already said that pandemic has impacted everyone. But the most impacted by the pandemic would be those whose liberties have been curtailed.
Right.
Children in institutional care, in the observation homes, in the special homes, who are either awaiting inquiry in their cases because they have been alleged to have committed an offense, are, again, to use that term, most vulnerable.
Right.
And unfortunately, let me tell you that the conditions in these observation homes in which these children in conflict with law are kept is not very different from the conditions in the adult prisons.
Right, sir.
These are not detention facilities. These are not prisons, of course. The law doesn't allow us to use, but still, they are detained there. The liberties are curtailed. And all the observation homes, especially in Uttar Pradesh, which is the most populated state, having the largest number of children in these homes, the same problem of overpopulation. I'll give you the figures for Uttar Pradesh. The 24 observation homes in Uttar Pradesh, sanctioned capacity is around 1,300.
Okay.
Before the lockdown, the actual number of children residing in these observation homes was in excess of 2,000. You can understand. Now, this overpopulation has its adverse effect on the resources and then other amenities, of course, which would be scarce. Luckily, the Supreme Court on 3rd of April issued another set of orders. It took suo motu cognizance of impact of COVID-19 on child protection homes and all, and issued slew of directions to the state government, to the child welfare committees, to the juvenile justice boards, and asked them to release children in deserving cases again to decongest the observation homes. Uttar Pradesh released around 600 children in compliance with that order. But there is one aspect, there is one thing that I think undid everything that was done on this front. During the same period, around the same number of children were arrested, were detained, and were sent to the observation homes as new cases. New cases. That was probably because the Supreme Court forgot to include in that order a paragraph asking the state governments to not arrest children during this period and keep them in observation.
That's it.
So the same issues
Mm-hmm.
which the prisoners are facing in the adult prisons, in the jails, our children are facing,
Mm-hmm.
who are in conflict with law in the observation homes, and the society treats them as criminals. The society views them no differently as they view an adult criminal.
Right.
But the state, the law, the judicial system, the machinery is under an obligation to view them separately as a separate class. And only because they have committed some crime, of course, they should not be meted out the same treatment. So this decongestion of detention facilities for children, observation homes and special homes, was done half-heartedly. And I'm quite disappointed by the approach, the attitude of the state governments across the country. I won't say that Uttar Pradesh government did this, could have done that, what the other governments did. I know that at the end of the day, every state government would be behaving the same way.
Right, sir.
So the problem remains in spite of that Supreme Court's directive of depopulating the observation homes and detention facilities for children.
Right. That is a very important aspect. I think the impact, as you mentioned, the most vulnerable of the entire criminal justice system gets affected because of the pandemic. We've talked about various aspects about it. You've also mentioned in your initial speech, your address, when we talk about the impact of the Epidemic Diseases Act and its relationship with Section 188 of Indian Penal Code. Very quickly, this is my last question to you, and rather general, broad question as to how this Epidemic Diseases Act, we all know, the legislation has now been criticized for either being out of place or being archaic or probably not being of appropriate relevance. But before we start commenting on the same, there is this the impact on Section 188 that plays a little bit of role when it comes to dispensation of justice and penalization is concerned. So, sir, I would love to know what your opinion is upon, like, when we talk about the Epidemic Diseases Act and its impact or its relevance, and when we talk about its correlation with 188 and the punishment, is it appropriate? Is it enough to somehow support what the Epidemic Diseases Act is concerning, or the procedural part of it a little bit?
Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897 is part of what we call the colonial legacy that we are still carrying with us. Many of us had not even heard of such a law. And you might also be knowing that after this present government assumed office, they had decided to do away with many old laws which had lost their relevance and had become obsolete. And they even passed several, I think, umbrella legislations repealing in one go, in one stroke, several laws. Luckily, Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897 escaped that onslaught on the so-called obsolete laws. But if you look at the original legislation, as it was implemented beginning of the pandemic. The language is obsolete. The phrases that it uses is also, I think, obsolete. We hardly have had any judicial opinion on such an old legislation.
Right, sir.
And it makes a reference to section 188 of IPC. 188 of IPC, it makes a reference.
Right.
Now, there has been an amendment to this Epidemic Disease Act by way of an ordinance, It's now more broad-based.
Mm-hmm.
It now provides for more enhanced punishments and all. But the real issue remains vis-a-vis section 188 of IPC. 188 of IPC provides for punishment for violation of any duly promulgated order by a public servant, and is not peculiar to the Epidemic Diseases Act only. Any order that has been duly promulgated would lead to some punishment if violated, of course. The real legal issue is not about the provision of punishment. The real legal issue is about the procedure in which that punishment can be inflicted. What we are debating, and I have spoken to people in police, I have also spoken to people in prosecution, I have also spoken to people in lower judiciary. They are not on the same page when it comes to that what would be the appropriate procedure to implement section 188 of IPC, to invoke section 188 of IPC. 195 says that it can only be a complaint case, complaint by a public servant, and police is registering FIR under section 188 of IPC. But something that you need to understand here is that section 188 of IPC is never included in the FIR alone. It's not a standalone provision. It is clubbed with other provisions of IPC, like section 269 would be there invariably, section 270 would be there invariably. If quarantine rules have been violated, section 271 would be there. Most probably section 290 of IPC would also be there, which provides for punishment for public nuisance and all. So these offences have varied character. Some are cognizable, some are non-cognizable, some are bailable, some are non-bailable. So when a non-cognizable and a cognizable case are clubbed together, offences are clubbed together. One is non-cognizable offence, the other is a cognizable offence. The police gets power as if the offence is cognizable. So because section 188 has not been applied separately as a stand-alone provision against a single individual across the country, that concern about the procedural aspect of section 188, which is governed by section 195 of CRPC, is misplaced. Because if other provisions other provisions which are not governed by section 195 of CRPC are clubbed with section 188 of IPC in the FIR, in the charge sheet, of course. The bar would not apply. तो चार्जशीट पे कॉग्निजेंस लेने का जो नॉर्मल रूट होता है, which is the normal route in the regular offences, of course, that route can be taken even in case of an offence punishable under section 188 of IPC, which is, as I said, it's not a stand-alone provision in most cases, but in almost all FIRs, it is clubbed with 269, 270, 271, and other provisions under the Disaster Management Act as well, which you would find that are all cognizable and non-bailable. Yeah.
Right, sir. So basically, the totality of the impact of the Epidemic Diseases Act has been that the procedural aspect of the entire process when it comes to penalization or the cognizance, as you mentioned, over the different instances, and there is some confusion regarding the same. All has now been highlighted because of the fact that Epidemic Diseases Act, it has been invoked after such a long period of time, and the fact that the jurisprudence has the jurisprudence has not evolved over time and time again. So I think with the recent ordinances like the one including the attack on healthcare workers also as an offence under the Epidemic Diseases Act and all of those developments
with enhanced punishment, of course, many I think
right, most of these so these
many new provisions have been added with enhanced punishment.
Right.
Many are questioning that whether that is justified, because punishment must be proportionate to the extent of harm that is sought to be prevented and all, and the extent of injury that you cause. But certainly many believe that by enhancing punishment we deter people, which is again not a very correct, I think, approach and understanding of how criminal law works.
Okay, right, sir. Well, I believe that that is a very interesting sort of a very in-depth analysis of how Epidemic Diseases Act with respect to Section 188 would function and how these developments are now impacting the society in total. Thank you so much. I think we've had a very constructive discussion. We've talked about multiple aspects of how exactly COVID-19 is impacting criminal justice system. We've understood all those factors, starting all the way from the overall impact. We talked about the virtual courts. We've talked about the prisoners. We talked the prison rights and prisoners, the conditions of the prisons. We talked about children who are in conflict with law, and finally we could talk about the Epidemic Diseases Act and the relationship that it shares with Section 188 and the procedural aspect of the same. I believe anyone who tunes into this podcast will really benefit a lot and add a lot of value to their perspectives and understanding of these issues. Do you have any closing remarks for our listeners?
Of course, one, I think one of the worst impacts of COVID-19 impact on criminal justice administration as such is that it normalized the police excesses and brutalities.
Right, sir. Right.
The way Indian society was enjoying images and videos and audios of police brutality was something that was very disheartening. I believe that we need to ponder over this.
Right, sir.
That police is meant to ensure that people do not violate norms. There can't be any, I think, disagreement as far as this role of the police is concerned. But the police is not the court. They can't do that in the name of swift justice. That's no justice. If I have violated, say for example, a certain rule which makes me criminally liable, I must be held accountable under the due process of law, by following the due process, by following the procedure. And police is only an instrumentality in facilitating that procedure. Police is not judge. Police can only do what the law allows police to do. And certainly if I or someone else has violated a rule, police has no right to use force without reason and to make me do sit-ups and so many things. So the Indian society is also to be blamed, that how they have accepted this as something that police is doing for the. No, that's not for your benefit. This can't be acceptable in a vibrant, functional democracy. This would be my closing remark.
Right. So I'm actually very grateful that you brought this up. I think the recent discussions that I've had on this issue, and why I am a little bit so I will stay very careful when I touch this issue, because it's a very sensitive issue. We see that police brutality has caused deaths which could have been avoided, especially in the times of lockdown.
They did not spare. They did not spare even the most, I think, harassed people on the streets, on the roads. The migrant laborers. There have been, I think, there have been cases. There have been, I think, social media reports in the mainstream media as well, that how inimical their behavior was towards those people who had lost everything in an alien city and had the courage to move to their villages and had no support. No, I think,
I think that's a very important point with these changing times and the kind of now the emphasis is being played, it's being pushed over the condition of how police, because we also understand there are reasons. Obviously we are really grateful as a society to all the frontline workers, especially the policemen who take time out and protect us, but there are situations where even the policemen or the police force sometimes do exceed over their actions.
There are very right. I think you very rightly pointed out that how there were many, I think, silver linings as well. That how police showed an entirely different face, very people-friendly face, going beyond their defined role and extending help to the needy and all. And that must be appreciated.
Right, sir.
But because they did something very appreciable, their brutalities and excesses can't be condoned.
Okay. Right, sir.
That is no justification. मारा तो क्या हुआ, खाना भी खिलाया था. खाना भी खिलाया था is all right. But मारा था without any justification, and assuming the role of a judge and a magistrate is something which can never be justified, is something that are always condemned.
So at this point, I would just seek a little bit clarification. Would you agree that probably this confusion regarding the delimitation of power of the policemen is because of the vague wordings of legislations like Epidemic Diseases Act, which barely have 4 sections? And if probably there are, in times of epidemic diseases, or is there a proper justification
of, okay, this is
the power?
In fact, the police also, the establishment, the entire establishment, in spite of so many efforts that have been made, is still governed largely by even an older legislation than the Police Act of 1861. So they still work with the same colonial mindset.
Right.
So in spite of all the decisions that have been delivered by the Supreme Court in Prakash Singh case in 2006, police reforms, all the tall claims that we make,
That's
Surabji committee, this and that. Nothing substantial has happened.
right, sir.
And I believe that we can't blame. We can't put the blame on a single legislation like the Epidemic Diseases Act. I think it's more deep-rooted a melody,
Right, sir.
more deep-rooted problem. Yeah.
I think this is a very concise yet very in-depth sort of an analysis of the issue that is very relevant today and is impacting the society. But in totality, I think the fact that we are now aware of these changes and the kind of situations that are happening probably will help us guide our way as a nation or as a country where people are conscious about these issues into a much better direction. And most importantly, I think this conversation is going to help a lot of especially law students or aspirants who are trying to understand the impact of COVID-19. And who better to tell us about this than you? So thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you so much for
pleasure. I immensely enjoyed the entire conversation. We had planned it for only half an hour, and you see that 1.5 hours.
We always love listening to you, sir. It's I believe the kind of I think the perspectives that we gain is very important, especially in times where losing perspective to various influences is very easy. So yes. So anyway, so thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity today. I had a wonderful time. I hope you had a good time too.
Same here. Yeah, fantastic. All the best.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.